Hey guys, Dustin here, and welcome to another episode of Horroritis. So, my last original verse remake video was My Bloody Valentine, and that received a pretty good response and actually got a couple requests for more original verse remake videos. So, this one is going to be kind of near and dear to my heart. This one is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, be warned that there will be spoilers for this movie, but since the original was made in like 1984 and the remake was made in 2010, if you haven't seen these, I don't think you're going to see these, and I don't really know why I'm giving you a spoiler warning, but either way, spoilers ahead. Now, like I said, this one is kind of near and dear to my heart. I grew up watching the original Nightmare on Elm Street and actually went through all of the series multiple times in my life, and you know, it remains one of my favorite series till this day. However, even though I'm a little bit biased, I'm going to try to stay, straight down the middle, give you just the facts and let you make up your own mind and try to stay as unbiased as I possibly can. However, if it bleeds through a little bit, you're going to have to just forgive me. It's just the way things are. So, quick rundown, both movies are essentially the same story, just the remake has changed a few plot points to kind of make it more interesting and updated, and I think more original in its own right is what it was trying to do. Let me just go ahead and start off with some of the things that I think the remake got right. First on the list, obviously, is the visuals. Now, granted, there's like a 26-year difference between the original and the remake, and visual effects have come a long way in that time, but the visuals, I mean, sure, a lot of them are CGI, but nothing is like really groundbreaking. There's nothing like super amazing that you would, remember afterward, but just more of, what you do see is kind of visually pleasing, and, there's a lot of gore and blood and just really good effects for your average horror fan, especially like in the boiler room scenes with the bodies hanging and stuff like that. All that looks really good. So, obviously they would be better with such a time difference, but, this movie did pretty well with the visual effects, and I kind of like that. Another thing that the remake did quite well was it introduced the idea of microsleep, or micro naps, or micro dreams, and what that is, it's a very real thing, and like truck drivers experience it a lot. It's when your brain gets so tired that you just kind of like, you nod off for like a split second, or you basically, you can dream with your eyes open for seconds at a time. It's just kind of a way of your brain shutting down to just quickly recharge and then come back online. And if you've ever driven for like a long distance without stopping, it's probably happened to you at least once or twice. I know it's happened to me a few times. Especially back when I used to drive airport shuttles, I would be in the shuttle for, extended periods of my day, and just seeing the same stretch of road over and over again, your brain kind of shuts down, and sometimes you go into little micro sleeps and you come back and you're like, oh, what the hell just happened? I should probably pull over and get a cup of coffee. So I think that, the fact that this movie introduced that idea was actually really cool, because it's a real thing that does happen, and it hadn't been addressed in any of the movies up until the remake. Now, I'm not 100% sure if it had even been discovered back in the 80s when the original movie was made, but even all the way up into the 90s, as the series went, nobody had never introduced the idea of microsleep or micro naps. So I thought it was really cool that the remake introduced that idea and actually played with it quite a bit. One of the other things that the remake got right was when somebody went to sleep, Freddy could not just affect them, but affect the world around them. Specifically when somebody went into one of those micro naps. Like, the scene that really sticks in my mind is when Nancy is in the pharmacy, and she blinks out for a second in the car, and Freddy's there and chases her into the pharmacy. And in her dream, he's like dragging his claws across the wall, and it's sparking and screeching like it does. But in real life, when she's like, backing away on the pharmacy floor, stuff's like falling off the shelves on top of her and stuff like that. And I thought it was just like a really cool idea that, not only could he affect the person, but he could affect the world around them. And, in the original, it kind of did that, but it was more like affected the person's body. And in this one, it you know, especially during the microsleeps, like I said, it could affect the world around them. And I thought that was a really cool idea, and the execution was really well done. So now let's go into some of the things that the remake got wrong, in my opinion. Top of the list, big one for me, is Freddy's face. In the original, everything was, you know, it was practical effects, you know, and in the remake it's CGI. And I understand that having a CGI Freddy face is probably a lot easier than having an actor sit in a chair for hours on end, putting on this whole prosthetic face piece and, you know, all the head effects and whatnot. But even with all of those practical effects and whatnot, the original Freddy was still a lot more expressive, if you get what I'm saying. His face moved a lot more. It was like he was his own character with his own personality, and a lot of his personality was based on his facial features. And even in the original, though, even though he stayed kind of shadowed and mysterious a lot, you know, he still was his own character, and, you know, he was more mysterious, but still believable. He could play off of other people, and the facial expressions helped a lot. In the remake, it's a CGI Freddy face, and honestly, it doesn't move a whole lot. It's not very expressive, and I understand that, you know, the story of Freddy is he got his face burnt. You know, his whole body was burnt. So the face is nothing more than just, you know, melted skin and tissue and muscle and stuff like that. And it's not going to be very expressive. But at the same time, he's like a nightmare monster who can do pretty much whatever he wants. So his face should be able to move. But instead what we see is, you know, kind of like this expressionless, motionless face. And the mouth just kind of moves a little bit.
It's real. I'm real.
And they rely on Jackie Earle Haley's voice to kind of portray the creepy. And while it is creepy, and there's things he does that are very, very creepy, it doesn't seem to work as well as the Robert Englund Freddy. You know, Robert Englund he took Freddy and he made it a living, breathing character.
Please, God.
This is God.
Not just, you know, the random monster in the darkness. And in this case, they tried to do that, and I don't think it worked out quite as well. And a lot of that is because the face was just so awkward and stiff. Another thing I think the remake got wrong was the ending altogether. In the original, you know, we see Nancy, once she figures out what's going on, she plans, and, you know, she formulates an idea, puts it into action, and we see everything come together piece by piece. We see her setting up all these traps around her house. She knows what she's going to do. She's going to go into her dream. She's going to pull Freddy out, and she's basically going to run him through this obstacle course from hell to weaken him down so that she can eventually kill him. And, you know, we see that, and we watch all of that planning and preparation, and we see her putting in all the work, and we want her to succeed. We want to see all of this work pay off, and it does, and we feel good about that. In the remake, it's nothing like that. There's no planning, there's no plotting. They decide, well, I'm gonna go to sleep and I'm gonna pull him out, and we'll see what happens from there, and we'll wing it and hope for the best. And that's basically what they do. Quentin stays up and watches Nancy as she falls asleep, but of course Quentin falls asleep, much like Johnny Depp's Glenn did in the original. Nancy finds Freddy, pulls him out, but instead of, you know, running him through an obstacle course or beating the crap out of him, they basically get lucky that there's some stuff laying around that they can beat him up with, and, you know, eventually that works. So it's kind of like, in the original, it was like we see a clear plan, an execution of the plan, and a very pleasing resolve. And over here, it's just like, oh, these guys got lucky. Good for them, I guess. So now let's talk about the things that both movies did pretty much the same. And this, for me, is kind of like the #1 remake sin. And as this series goes on and we talk about more remakes, you're going to see this cropping up quite a bit because it's something that remakes do all the time. And they take a very popular scene from the original and they recreate it, whether or not it actually goes into the movie, whether or not it fits. They'll recreate that shot and they'll throw it in and they'll say, good, now the original fans will come running. And the first one on the list is, in the original, it's the Tina death. In the remake, it's the Chris death. And it's where they, in the original, Tina is in bed and Freddy gets her and she like floats up in the air and smashes off the walls and gets sliced up and falls down and blood sprays everywhere. And it's basically the exact same thing that happens in the remake with Chris. She's in bed, she gets attacked by Freddy, she floats up, she's bouncing off the walls, she gets sliced up, she falls down, blood sprays everywhere. That's it. The only difference is that in the remake it's CGI, wires, whatever. In the original they actually built a room that rotated so that they could film that, where she's, crawling up the walls and across the ceiling and falling down and stuff like that. That didn't happen in the remake. She just kind of like floated up and swung back and forth and bounced off the walls and stuff before she died. And I think the original worked a lot better than the remake. The scene served a purpose as far as story, so it's good that it was there. But the execution was a little bit off. It wasn't as dramatic, or it didn't make you feel as excited as the original did. Another thing that both movies did pretty much exactly the same was the bedroom wall scene, where Nancy's in bed and then right above her wall, you see Freddy's face kind of push out through the wall and move around and then just kind of go back, and the wall goes back to being a solid thing. And this one actually did not serve a purpose, because in the original it led to like the creepy factor. They were in Tina's house, her parents were out of town, they had just they'd been talking about the dreams that they'd both been sharing, and they were all very well creeped out. So as Nancy's sleeping, you see the wall push out and you're like, oh man, that's creepy, and it lends to the atmosphere, and it adds to the kind of feeling of dread and excitement that's building up in that scene right up before Tina dies. In the remake, not so much. It's just kind of in there as, I guess, kind of an homage to the original, but it serves no point. It doesn't further the story. It doesn't lend to the atmosphere. It's just kind of there, and honestly, you can tell that it's a very CGI. In the original, they actually had to build a thing, and it was to push through and then come back, and nobody had ever seen anything like that. And it was a very practical effect. And in the remake, it was CGI, and it just wasn't as great, if you know what I mean. Another thing that both movies did that was pretty much the same was the bathtub scene. Now, we knew what the bathtub scene was as soon as Nancy gets into the bathroom in the remake. We know what's coming because we've seen this. It's an iconic scene from the original movie. So we all knew going in that this was going to be in the remake. Everybody who had seen the original knew what to expect here. And as soon as the bathroom door closed and we see Nancy in there, we know what's going to happen. And if you haven't seen this, in this scene, Nancy gets into the tub. She starts relaxing. She dozes off. And then we see Freddy's claw come up from between her legs. And then, in the original, she gets drugged down into the water, and it's kind of like this dark underwater, endless abyss that he pulls her down into. And in the remake, he just kind of like sucks her into a dream and into the boiler room where he can borderline sexually assault her, I guess. This also didn't really further the story. What you get out of this scene could have been done in any other way. It didn't have to be the bathtub scene. And I think the bathtub scene was only in there just kind of like to entice older fans to come to see the new thing. In the original, Nancy gets pulled down into this dark underwater abyss, and it gives you a sense of dread and urgency, because anybody who's ever had a close call in water knows what it's like for a split second to think you're going to drown and you're going to die. Even in the bathtub, you slip down in, water goes up your nose, you know that it burns, And, you know, just for like a split second in the back of your head, even if you're 100% safe, there's always that feeling. You know what that is, and you know how that feels, just for that split second that maybe you don't come up. And so the whole time that she's being pulled down and she's fighting to get back up, you kind of feel that, and you feel it in your chest, and you feel it in your head, and you feel that urgency and that helplessness. And then when she finally gets up out of the tub, you know, you feel relieved with her, and you know, you're glad that she got out. And in the remake, you don't get that. She's in a dream with him, and you know, he's basically got her pinned to the wall and like licks the side of her face and stuff. And then, you know, she gets woken up by a phone call, and that was it. I mean, sure, it gave us a chance to see how creepy Freddy can be, but I mean, the rest of the story really plays up how creepy he is anyway, so it was really unnecessary. A couple things that both movies do exactly the same, and I think is good, is that, you know, the movie takes place in Springwood, and of course all the Freddy movies take place in Springwood, except for Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which actually takes place in like LA because it was, you know, a very meta movie. But yeah, the town is Springwood. The address of the house is like 1428. So they kept those things. Those are kind of like staples, and you know, kind of, those are really fan service right there for the people who are really into the original series. You know, that's, you know, it has to be in Springwood. The house doesn't have to be 1428 Elm, but I mean, it's kind of cool that it is. And I thought that was a pretty awesome nod to the fans, at least, if nothing else. Just those little things, that little bit of attention to those details. I thought those were really cool. All right, so now let's get down to the big difference, the main issue between these two movies, I think, that really either makes it or kills it for a lot of people, and that is Freddy's backstory. Now, in the original, Freddy is known as a child killer. That's it. Nobody ever goes deeper than that. He kills children, and he was arrested and put on trial, and due to a technicality, somebody didn't file the form correctly or something, he was released, found not guilty, whatever, and the parents tracked him down and killed him. So that was that. And, you know, somehow that's okay for us. We're okay with that because, you know, it just lends to him being a general killer, and, you know, just children were a big part of that at the beginning, but we've also seen him go on to kill teenagers and adults, and it didn't really matter. It was just anybody who got in his way eventually. And, you know, we seem to be okay with that. And his whole backstory was kind of overshadowed by his explosive personality, and it all became about the inventive kills and the one-liners and stuff like that. In this one, in the remake, Freddy was a child molester, and they play that up really big. You know, it was a very, very big, important part of the story, and that, I think, for a lot of people, was kind of like a no-go. I mean, in this movie, you know, he worked at a preschool and basically, you know, abused a bunch of 5-year-olds, and, you know, didn't get arrested, didn't go to trial. The parents just straight up tracked him down and killed him, which, you know, seems like an appropriate knee-jerk reaction to the situation on a lot of parents' parts. I mean, I that's a thing you could see happening. But at the same time, the reason that the original series was so popular and lasted for as long as it did was Freddy was a likable character regardless of what he had done. Not so much in the remake, and I think this is the thing that really kept this movie from having a sequel or even turning into its own series, was because for some reason we just cannot get behind a child molester. For any reason. We're okay with a child murderer. I'm not 100% sure why, but we are. We just cannot get behind a child molester. And the fact that that was a huge part of the story in this movie, I think, is the reason that it never went any further. This movie was released, and then that was it. And I think that's why the attempt to have another remake after this kind of it fell through and keeps falling through. Sometimes people will bring up, oh, there's going to be another Nightmare on Elm Street remake, and then it never happens. And I think a lot of it is people are afraid to kind of broach this subject anymore, especially after the remake made it such a big part of the story. So with that being said, obviously for me, the original wins out over the remake in this case. Now, having said that, that does not mean that the original is better or the remake is inferior. It's just my personal preference. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Do you like the original or the remake? Which one is better in your eyes? Also, be sure to like this video, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments, again, did you like the original or the remake? And suggest any other original versus remake videos that you might want to see. Also, all of the social media links are in the description below, and that's about it. So, as always, I'm Dustin, this has been Horroritis, and until next time, keep it creepy.